The Holy Gospel according to Luke, the 16th chapter.
Glory to you, O Lord.
There was a rich man who was dressed in purple and fine linen, and who feasted sumptuously every day. And at his gate lay a poor man named Lazarus, covered with sores, who longed to satisfy his hunger with what fell from the rich man's table. Even the dogs would come and lick his sores. The poor man died and was carried away by the angels to be with Abraham. The rich man also died and was buried. In Hades, where he was being tormented, he looked up and saw Abraham far away with Lazarus by his side. He called out, "Father Abraham, have mercy on me, and send Lazarus to dip the tip of his finger in water and cool my tongue, for I am in agony in these flames." But Abraham said, "Child, remember that during your lifetime you received your good things, and Lazarus in like manner evil things. But now he is comforted here, and you are in agony. Besides all this, between you and us a great chasm has been fixed, so that those who might want to pass from here to you cannot do so, and no one can cross from there to us." He said, "Then, Father, I beg you to send him to my father's house, for I have 5 brothers, that he may warn them so that they will not also come into this place of torment." Abraham replied, "Well, they have Moses and the prophets. They should listen to them." He said, "No, Father Abraham, but if someone goes to them from the dead, they will repent." He said to him, "If they do not listen to Moses and the prophets, neither will they be convinced, even if someone rises from the dead." The Gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, O Christ.
Well, it's not like we hadn't been warned. Everything that Jesus was doing up to here was pointing toward this complete reversal of reality, having the world turned inside out and upside down. The first will be last and the last first, he said. We heard it in the Magnificat, Mary's song of praise to the Lord for that opportunity to bear the Christ child. She had said, "He has brought down the powerful from their thrones and lifted up the lowly. He has filled the hungry with good things and sent the rich away empty." So for those who hadn't been listening, well, the time has come. Judgment has played itself out. Remember the gospel story from last week about the shrewd manager? I believe a number of you do, because you've been saying you were as confused as I was. But right after Jesus told that parable, we are told that the Pharisees, the ones who follow the Torah and the laws of Moses, who were lovers of money, heard all that, and they ridiculed Jesus, kind of like I did in the sermon. But Jesus replied to those lovers of money with what we heard in today's gospel reading. Well, there's 2 parts of this story that were a bit confusing to me when I first heard it. And I thought maybe you would be hung up by it too. The first was that this isn't the same Lazarus that was raised from the dead, who was the brother to Mary and Martha. I thought there might be some important connection we were supposed to see between the 2 stories, but scholars say there's no real evidence that makes that the same person. The name itself is actually pretty common because it comes out of Hebrew, meaning God is my help. It's a pretty good name for the poor man at the gate. So the second of my rabbit holes here this morning, I strongly believe that this story is not about salvation. Yes, it does talk about where these 2 people go when they die, the poor man being carried away by the angels, the rich man buried into torment. But if we think about this story as a story of salvation, all of our understanding of being saved by God's grace simply goes out the window. We would read this as only being able to go to heaven if you're poor. Well, why then would we try to help anyone who's poor, since we're commanded by Jesus to get away from being poor? That would ruin their chances of going to heaven. Why would anyone who is poor want to be helped? But instead, we believe and we have faith that we've been saved by God's grace through Jesus' death on a cross. So our salvation isn't based on being rich or poor. So to think of this parable in that way, as a story of salvation, is, in my opinion, kind of dangerous. We simply need to hear the story as it was intended, as a story. So since I have two things that I don't think the parable is about, I wanted to take a look at the things that I do think it's about. First, I think we need to look at the separation that we find in this story. We first hear about these two characters, a rich man who dresses luxuriously and feasts sumptuously. I guess the bigger the words, the richer you feel. Contrast that with the guy who lays at his gate, picking up the crumbs from the rich man's table as the dogs lick his sores, which is his only source of relief. The rich man keeps that guy, named Lazarus, away from him with his gate, a physical barrier that keeps things that are unwanted out. This barrier separates them, or so he hopes. The rich man tries to ignore the poor man because there's something that is kept in his way from seeing. So he can go on eating sumptuously and dressing luxuriously and not sharing any of it one bit. Have we ever put up a gate so that we can't see what's on the other side? Have we ever put up a barrier so we can keep those things that we feel we need without the risk of sharing them? Who are the ones that we've been ignoring who lay at our gate? When in our lives have we been the ones ignored or had a gate put up so we couldn't get in? In our culture, who are the insiders and who are the outsiders? How might those labels change for us if we imagine that gate in between them? Well, with that gate in their way, these two characters both died. Poor man, as we heard, went to be with Abraham, and the rich man went to Hades. And again, they were separated. But this time, the separation was a great chasm with no hope of being opened like a gate or crossed by any means. Not even by a tightrope like that guy who tried to walk across the Grand Canyon a couple of months ago. It's the best image I could come up with, I'm sorry. But the point is that this separation between them was vast and growing, and there was nothing that could be done about it. And so then I began to wonder about the great chasms in our lives today. And since we were talking about the rich and the poor, let's talk about the great wealth chasm. An article I found from just a couple weeks ago pointed out that the income gap between the richest 1% and everyone else is the largest it's been since the Roaring '20s. Last year alone, incomes for the top 1% rose nearly 20%, compared with an average increase of 1% for everyone else. I'd say that's a bit of a chasm that would be difficult, if not impossible, to cross. So how do we address that? We hear in Timothy's letter that the love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. Isn't that something that's often misquoted? Money isn't the root of all evil, as I think we often hear. The love of money is a root of all kinds of evil. The love of money is making an idol out of our money, which is what causes us to stumble down the wrong path and causes this great chasm to grow. Remember, the gospel this week comes from Jesus addressing those Pharisees who were lovers of money. I also read this great quote that kind of summed up all this thinking for me. They said, people are to be loved and money is to be used, not the other way around. People are to be loved and money is to be used. I mean, how often do we flip those things, loving money and using people? I see it sending our economy into the tank as we see the highest amount of wealth inequality and food inequality and employment inequality, the most we've seen in decades. The gate that's in between the rich and the poor seems to be welded shut. So what did we hear? If you don't open that gate and start caring for the poor people, well, you're going to go to hell when you die. Wow. All right. A little kind of harsh words for us today. But yeah, we have a chance here and now to do something about this. We have a chance to open that gate and give a little more than just the scraps that fall off of our table. Because, let's face it, we're probably the rich ones he's talking about in this story. Not solely money-wise, we're rich in many ways. So how do we do something about that in this lifetime so that when that day comes, we're not begging for forgiveness? Well, we just need to do something. Anything, really. I mean, how many times have we heard this type of story? How many times has Jesus commanded his disciples and commanded us to care for the poor, to care for the neighbor? What does it take for us to listen and to do something about it? Which is the second part of this parable that I think deserves attention. Listening. Obviously, we're not the only ones who haven't listened. The rich guy says his family hasn't listened either, so obviously we've been the same human beings for thousands of years who just won't listen. We haven't listened to Moses and the prophets. We haven't listened to Jesus. When will we start to listen? But there's still hope. I think it's rather interesting that the rich man knows the name of the guy who's been laying at his gate for all that time. He doesn't cry out to Abraham, "Can you send that guy down here to cool my tongue?" He says, "Send Lazarus down here to bring me some relief." I mean, granted, he still wanted that poor guy to come and serve him, and he continued to ignore him by asking Abraham for him. But the fact that he called Lazarus by name gives us some hope that we do know our neighbor enough, that we do know what lies on the other side of that gate, to the point that we can do something. Well, I guess you know me enough by now that I want to find that line of good news in here. And so I wanted to end by turning back to the letter from Timothy, where he ends it by calling us to do good, to be rich in good works, generous and ready to share, thus storing up for ourselves the treasure of a good foundation for the future, so that we may take hold of the life that really is life. Life that really is life. That's the kingdom. No gates, no chasm, no rich and poor, no death. The kingdom is where we are convinced and we listen when we witness someone who rises from the dead. I mean, we've seen it. Will we listen?